Soil, pond, perlite, LECA, sphagnum moss, Aroid mix, Fluval Stratum. Today I want to talk about all the substrates I've used, how I use them, and what I like or dislike about them. Hi, my name is Jira and I'm the founder of Plant Corner. We are a small plant store in New York. Last week we asked our follower what the next video should be about, and a lot of you were wondering about different types of substrates and how to use them. In this video, when we talk about substrate, we are referring to things that we put as a grow medium for plants, and I would say they are divided into three groups: organic, inorganic, and synthetic. Organic, when we're talking about organic content, we're talking about living things or things that used to live. For example, we're talking about compost, which came from fruits or vegetables, or even like cardboard. We're talking about decaying plants or animals. We're talking about microorganisms, which is tiny living things that live in the soil. When we talk about inorganic substrate, we are talking about natural and unmodified substrates, for example, rocks, sand, or humus. The synthetic substrate still derive from a natural sources, but they have been through some kind of process. For example, perlite is a heated volcanic glass, or LECA, which is a heated clay or pond. And to provide a really broad understanding of the differences between organic and inorganic substrate, the organic substrates are usually rich in nutrients. They retain moisture really well, and they decompose over time, which is how they release nutrients into the soil. On the other hand, inorganic and synthetic substrates usually provide aeration and drainage. They don't really decompose, and they are less prone to pests and diseases. So the good thing, if you are only using inorganic substrate as your potting medium, you don't have to repot as often, or you can reuse your substrate over time because it doesn't decompose. So a good and healthy soil are usually composed of both organic and inorganic matter in order to create that perfect environment for the plant to thrive, which means it has to have good water retention and aeration, and also rich in nutrients so that the plants can absorb the nutrient through water, and also the soil should also let the air through. That way it reduces the chance of harmful bacteria growing inside the roots. Without further ado, let's get into looking at different substrates. The first one is Fox Farm Ocean Forest, and it has a good amount of aged forest products. I think they're referring to compost, peat moss, fish emulsion, shrimp meal, crab meal, bat guano, which is basically bat poop, worm casting, and they also have a pretty good amount of perlite that improves the drainage of the soil. The soil itself feels pretty fluffy, and based off of the color, I think it's pretty rich in nutrients. I think it's a good potting mix for most houseplants. It is quite well drained from the perlite that it's in, but I probably wouldn't use it with aroids that has thicker roots like monstera, aglaonemas. Even philodendron, I think they need a little more air in the soil. So if I were to use this with philodendron and monstera, I would add bark to make the soil a little chunkier. So for Fox Farm, I would use it with Scindapsus, Pothos, money tree, or even Spathiphyllum or peace lilies, because the root system is not as thick, and as long as you adjust the correct amount of water, they will be fine in this potting mix. From a quick test here, you can see that the soil holds a pretty good amount of water, but also still let a lot of water through. So I would say this is a good potting mix, and you probably don't have to fertilize this soil for the first 1 or 2 months after you planted the plant. Next, we have Rosy Soil, which I definitely think it's considered a premium soil. They developed this formula with a lot of scientists in order to not use peat as their main substrate because peat is not very environmentally friendly. And instead of peat, they used biochar, which we are going to talk about in just a minute. And mycorrhizae fungi, if you know, it's a beneficial fungi that allow the roots to absorb more nutrients. They also add pine bark, pumice, and sand to improve aeration, and they add some aged compost. And they age the compost first so that it minimizes the gnats attracting organic matter. Let's talk a little bit about biochar here because I do get a lot of questions. Biochar is a byproduct of charcoal, and what it does is that it holds on to water, oxygen, and nutrients. Biochar is considered a renewable product because we can make them, which is opposite to peat moss, which is our non-renewable substrate. A little tip when you're using rosy soil is I would put a little netting to cover the drainage hole because rosy soil particle is quite small. So if you don't cover it up when you repot a plant, the soil will come out a lot from the bottom. Now, rosy soil recommended that you wet or the soil first before you repot a plant to activate them. But I find that even though I repot a plant into rosy soil right away, and water it later, it still works just as well. And what I like about rosy soil, aside from being environmentally friendly, is that it holds moisture really well, but it also has high content of sand, which actually let the water drain out of the bottom. So you can see here, after I finish repotting, I usually try to move the plant from the old pot dry and then water the plant when it got into a new pot. That way the root can start exploring the new territory. Another thing to note about rosy soil is because it's made of biochar, which is a byproduct of charcoal. When you water, you will notice that the water comes out slightly darker because of the charcoal particles. Now for the cactus and succulent mix version, I noticed that they have more pumice, which helps with the aeration. They also have higher content of bark, so it feels a little grittier in my hand compared to the original rosy soil. For succulent and cactus mix, we have actually used this to root our Codex succulent type plants like Disyningia and Lithops. We just place the unrooted plants on top of rosy soil and give it just a little sip of water. A month later, it's completely rooted. Even though you just lift up the bulb or the plant, the whole thing just came up. And with a quick pour over test, we see that the soil, while absorbing moisture, it still releases a lot of water, so it's still really well drained. The next substrate is our Aroid mix, and it has a perfect amount of ingredients that hold moisture like peat and sphagnum moss, and also ingredients that create aeration like charcoal and all the different types of bark. It also has beneficial microbes, which really good for the plant's roots. And in order to use this, I highly recommend you mix it with water because sometimes the ingredient that hold moisture will fall to the bottom, so you want to mix them up well before you use. This mix is actually developed by a friend of ours who's a terrarium specialist for aroid plants, which refers to plants in Araceae family like Monstera, Philodendron, and Thurium. These plants grow in the rainforest and they use their thick roots to climb up other trees, so they like their roots to be exposed to air. And this is a very well draining mix, so I wouldn't recommend this mix for moisture loving plants like Calathea or peace lily or ferns because this mixture is actually too dry for them. We have been using this mix to pot all our rare Monstera, Philodendrons, and Anthuriums, and I really love that the mix smells like forest floor. It is very chunky, it lets the air goes through, the root seems to really love it, and it doesn't break down as fast as soil because it doesn't have a compost ingredients that decomposes over time. So you have to fertilize the plant in this mix, whether through a slow release fertilizer or with liquid fertilizer, but I do really like it. The next substrate is LECA, which is an acronym for Lightweight Expanded Clay Aggregate. It is made from baked clay balls. It can be mixed with soil, used on its own, or used as a drainage layer. Personally, I like to use it by itself. If you have a plant cutting that is rooted and you don't want to put it in soil because you were concerned about rotting it, I recommend using LECA. And what I like to use is with a net pot and a clear cup. That way I can see what's going on inside. As you can see here, LECA is very porous, so it contains a lot of air and moisture when you plant something in it. The way I would use LECA is I would add some of it in the net pot and then plant a cutting or a plant in it. If you are transferring a plant from soil, make sure to clean the soil out entirely. Then I add more LECA on top, and I usually either you rinse the LECA through first, or I usually rinse it after, hence why I use the net pot so that I can flush everything out. Remember to not discard this water in your pipe because it can clog it. Lastly, you can just grab a clear cup or other containers and then fill up the water until it sits just below the root level. Don't forget to add the nutrients into the water that you use because LECA itself does not have nutrients. The good thing about LECA is that it's definitely less messy, and fungus gnats can't really lay eggs in it because it doesn't have the right environment for them, and it also doesn't decompose, so there's less chance of the roots rotting. The next substrate is pond, which is short for semi-hydroponics, and it has usually a mix of pumice, zeolite, lava rocks, and other slow-release fertilizer. Similar to LECA, this is an inorganic substrate, but since the particle is much smaller, I think it's really good for plants with finer roots like this Maranta or Alocaceae and Hoyas. The benefit of ponds is also very similar to LECA in a way that fungus gnats can't really lay eggs in it, and it doesn't decompose, so there's less chance of stuff rotting. You can reuse these inorganic substrates as many times as you want, as long as there's no bacteria, so you can clean it up and reuse them for your other plants. Now, I would recommend watering pond from the top the first time just to get rid of all the small particles, but after that you can actually keep a reservoir under the pot and fill it up from the bottom. That way the plant can just absorb whatever it needs. I have grown this Siningia in pond and it has been doing really well, and I like that I don't have to worry about overwatering this plant. Next is Fluval Stratum, and it is an aquarium substrate made from volcanic soil. It is rich in mineral and nutrients that it releases over time, and if you really squeeze them up, you can see that it can be broken down into smaller pieces. And when fluval becomes dusty like this is the sign that tells me I have to repot the plant. I really like to use Fluval Stratum to root my cuttings because I think it gives the perfect amount of moisture and air that the cuttings need to root. I have these beautiful begonia cuttings which I will remove the bottom leaf in order to see the node, and then I will plant it in a clear cup. I'm not even going to punch a hole in this cup because as long as I know how much to water, they will be fine. Adding a little bit of stratum on the bottom, place the cutting in, and then just fill the rest of the cup with stratum. And what I like to do is giving it a sip of water so that the stratum will absorb and actually make this environment really humid for the plant, and for the plant to start rooting out to absorb that moisture. I really like stratum to root my cuttings like philodendrons. I have this Dioscorea this color that has been rooting in stratum and it's working really well. A quick note though is the stratum pH is low, so it might not be suitable for some plants. The next substrate is perlite, and I made a mistake here, and instead of recording the process, I hit record after I finished planting this cutting in perlite. But perlite is made of heated volcanic glass. It is pH balanced, porous, and lightweight. I usually mix perlite with soil to increase drainage and aeration, but it can also be used by itself to root cuttings. And because perlite is sterile, there's less chance of rotting. I usually root cuttings in perlite and use a heavier container because perlite is very light. And here are the 4 cuttings that we planted today. I will update in about 4 weeks to see how the cuttings are doing on our Instagram Plant Corner NYC. Last substrate we are talking about today is sphagnum moss, and it does hold a lot of moisture. This substrate holds 20 times its dry weight in water. It is pH balanced, and it's definitely more sustainable than peat moss. I usually use sphagnum moss for my carnivorous plants and as an in-between medium before I transfer from water to my aroid mix, so the roots can transform from water roots into soil roots. So if you want to create your own substrate, you can also do so by choosing components that retain moisture like peat, sphagnum moss, or cocoa coir, compost, worm casting, all those good stuff, and then mix them with a component that help increase aeration or drainage like perlite, pumice, charcoal, bark, or sand. If you find this video helpful, don't forget to click that like button and also subscribe to our channel so that you won't miss our future videos. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!